Hey everyone, this is Scott from Forgot to Grow Up. Welcome to our Legion Season 3, Episode 7 Thoughts video. I just finished watching the penultimate episode for this season of Legion, and I'm just going to be sharing my general thoughts. In this episode, David finally makes it back in time at the expense of Stitch's health, and potentially life it seems. But yes, he makes it back, and so does Sid, and and so this episode kind of revolves around David trying to convince his daddy. That's right, we get some more Charles Xavier in this episode. He tries to convince his dad to kind of help him in order to defeat Farouk. So I really enjoyed this episode because I like the interactions we get between David and his dad. We get 3 Omega level mutants with telepath abilities, and so that was really interesting. It's also interesting to see that Farouk is kind of introduced Charles Xavier to some of these ideas, at least in this iteration, about like the astral plane and certain abilities that Charles had never quite tapped into or never explored trying to develop. So I really enjoyed kind of seeing that different angle, seeing Charles Xavier meeting Farouk, and the fact that at first Farouk does seem like this kind of like stand-up kind of guy, but also does kind of, it seems like there's something going on at the same time. He seems a little too nice, and then by the end of the episode we kind of learn exactly what it is that I think initially led maybe to Charles fighting Farouk initially. I don't know if, because it's hard to say if in the initial timeline if David was ever there. We don't know. What I mean by that is, has David always gone back to the past to tell his dad about Farouk, and that's what's always sparked that little thing, which then leads to the whole chain of events, because that's how time works sometimes. So I'm really curious to see how they kind of tie this up, how it all works out actually in the next episode. Obviously, season finale, they're going to be wrapping a bunch of stuff up, especially since this will be the series finale, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I believe it is. It will be the series finale next week. So this penultimate episode for the whole series and this season I thought was pretty good. I liked we also got like Sid meeting David's mom, and them kind of having to like not debate but kind of mull over how do you kind of guide this little baby into not potentially being the David that they see from Sid's and theirs angle. So that was kind of interesting, especially with David's mom talking about the mental illness that kind of is hereditary in her family, at least with her grandmother and her mother both coming to the sickness, as she refers to it, speaking in tongues and etc. like that. So I like that there's kind of a connection for David, that the mental illness is kind of something he's almost inherited, and that's a little bit of an extra piece that he probably didn't know himself even. And so it will be interesting to see how that maybe plays into the next episode. But I thought that was kind of interesting. I like the kind of way they introduced it too, with Sid and David's mom telling Sid. Some of the other things that were kind of interesting about this episode. David makes it back and meets Charles. I like that they got to meet. I already kind of mentioned that. I liked when David was kind of trying to hide, in a sense, his Legion side from his dad when they were in David's mind, with the fact that they had all the doors closed, and David's other personalities, Legion, are all like banging on the doors, and eventually they get out, and Charles is not really exactly sure what's going on at first, but I think he's a smart enough guy. He started to put it together eventually. But I like kind of the visual representation of that, like all these guys, all the different legions, all the different Davids going daddy, daddy, all having their own little their own little issues with their own little daddy issues, I should say. So some of the other parts that were interesting about this, we see that time is starting to become really unstable. David is really abused both Stitch and her ability, and it's really wreaking havoc. We've got time demons all over the place in this episode, popping out of furnaces. That's the one thing I'm always confused about with these things, is where are they coming from? How did they melt? I do know how they melted it because they take time, but it's a little confusing sometimes. But it was still interesting to see them more and see that as kind of the villain in a sense, like kind of now that Sid and them are not like, they're trying to stop David, but they're also now on this kind of different path of it. Like, can we just change baby David? Is that a possibility? So I like that. I like that we've seen David kind of flashes back to him and Farouk talking about how David can make reality whatever he wants, and then we kind of see him do that a little bit to kind of help get him the rest of the way through time, because him and Stitch were having a little trouble. But anyways, I really just enjoyed that he's slowly starting to realize a little bit more, or remember more often, that he does have the ability to pretty much do anything. Like, I don't know if based off of what Farouk has done a few times this season, it seems like David probably maybe could have done some time travel if he wants to, without the need for Switch. So that'll be interesting to see if that plays out in any way next episode, especially with Switch being so injured and so hurt from, or drained and worn out by David, abusing her powers, making her, kind of forcing her to take him back 25, 30 years to, when Charles first met, or when Charles confronted Farouk, we should say. But the last little thing I had written down was that at the end of this episode, we see present day Farouk, who was trapped in the space between, the time in between time, the space between time and time. It was written on the screen, I can't remember exactly. Anyways, Farouk's stuck in this thing in between time, but he somehow makes it to the past at some point in the end. I think it has to do something with that painting that he makes his way through, and somehow it's connected to the time between time space, the space between time space, the place where he was stuck. But we see at the end of this episode he pops out, and so I'll be really curious to see in the next episode if Farouk comes back and is like, yep, it was my time to come back again and tell you, because this is how it worked last time. This is the only way it ever works, is for us to, go back in time. So yeah, I'm telling you, and so that means past Farouk will have to then live and then eventually go back to the past. I'm very curious to see if we'll have that kind of time loop, or if it's just straight, now they're just changing time. Now he's meeting himself. It's gonna hold, but he's also been able to talk to himself throughout time before in the series. So I'm curious to see where that'll end up going. But yes, that's all my thoughts on this episode of Legion. I'm sure let me know in the comments below what you thought about this episode. What are your predictions for the series finale next week? That's all my thoughts. Thanks again for joining me today. Sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and have a good one.